When it was my turn, I stepped up to the teller's window and slid the deposit slip and the check to the girl behind the counter. As she was doing what tellers do, I asked her to give me the balance on the account. She pushed some buttons on the computer, looked at the screen, wrote some numbers down on a slip of paper and pushed it across the counter to me. I looked at it and pushed it back at her. This can't be right. It is only half of what should be there. She looked back at her screen. I show a cash withdrawal yesterday for half of what was in the account. Would you check the balance in my savings account, please? And I gave her the account number. It was the same deal. It was exactly half of what should have been there, and a cash withdrawal had been made the previous afternoon. I left the teller window and was heading for the door when all of a sudden something else occurred to me. I went over to the woman you dealt with when you wanted access to your safe deposit box. There were supposed to be 5 CDs there, but only 3 were in the box and all of Tony's jewelry was gone. I cleaned out the box and left the bank. I wasn't stupid. The only other person who had access to the deposit box and the accounts was my wife, Tony. The question on my mind was, why would my wife go to the bank and take out half of everything we had? But even as I asked myself the question, I knew the answer. The missing jewelry was the tip-off. Tony was either going to leave me or she had already gone. I took out my cell and tried to reach her at work and was told that she had taken the afternoon off to take care of some personal business, and I headed on home where hopefully some answers awaited. My wife's car was in the drive when I got there. I parked and went inside, and Tony wasn't downstairs, so I went up the staircase and down the hall to the bedroom. Tony was kneeling in front of the chest of drawers, and she was taking things out of it and packing them in a box. I saw several other boxes in the room, and since she apparently hadn't heard me come in, I just stood and watched for a minute or so before saying, "Did you plan on leaving me a note, or were you just going to leave?" I saw her stiffen and she stopped what she was doing, but she didn't turn around. After several very long moments, she said, "I was going to tell you when you got home tonight. Is it because of something I've done?" "No, it isn't that." "Are you leaving me because of another man?" "Yes and no." "Well, that is certainly a clear answer. I'm leaving because of another man, but I'm not leaving for another man." "That's even clearer still." And I turned around and went downstairs. 10 minutes later, she followed me down and said, "You seem to be taking this calmly. Quite frankly, I expected you to be gone when I got here. I stopped at the bank today to deposit a check, and just imagine my surprise when I found half the money gone from all of our accounts. On a whim, I checked the deposit box and saw that all your jewelry was gone, so I figured you were too. It kind of surprised me since I wasn't aware of any problems with our marriage, but they always say that the husband is the last to know. There were no problems with the marriage, at least not of your making. The problem has been all mine, and tonight I was going to tell you about it. I fully expected that when I was finished you would throw me out of the house, so I've been packing and trying to get as much of my things out of here as I can before you change the locks on me." "Oh, come on, Tony, things can't be that bad." "Oh yes, they can, but first, before I tell you what I need to tell you, I want you to know that I love you with all my heart and soul. You mean the world to me, and I don't want you to ever doubt that for a second. Human nature says that you will doubt it, and I can't help that, but I do love you. Always have and always will. I've never doubted that, Tony." "Yes, but you didn't know what you are about to find out. Do you remember that Christmas party at Eric's house 3 years ago?" How could I forget? It was not one of my shining moments. Eric was the owner of the company I worked for. The party had not been a real joyous occasion. Business had been slow, there had been some layoffs, and everyone knew that more were coming. I knew I would be gone in the next round, and I was feeling sorry for myself. I drank way too much and passed out. I woke up the next morning to a pounding head and was somewhat surprised to find that I was in my own bed. "I remember it," I said, "only too well. It was after you had passed out, and Eric had a couple of guys carry you into his den and put you down on the couch. I'd had a lot to drink also, nowhere near as much as you, and Eric came up to me and said that it was a crying shame that he was going to lose someone as talented as you. I didn't know what he was talking about because you never told me how bad things were at the company. I asked what he meant, and he told me about the coming layoffs. I started crying. We had just bought the new house and furniture, and you had gone out and bought a second car so I'd have one to drive. We were in debt up to our eyebrows, but weren't worried about it because you had a great job and were making good money. I had just started my job, but it didn't pay enough to carry us if you were out of work. I told all that to Eric, and then he told me that things didn't have to be that way. I asked him what he meant, and he told me that he had wanted me from the first time he had seen me, and that if I would have love with him he wouldn't lay you off. I was astonished that could say such a thing to me, a married woman, and I walked away from him in a huff. I had another drink or two, and then Eric came up to me and asked me if I had given any more thought to his proposition. The truth was that I hadn't thought of anything else. I thought of losing the house and everything else we had worked so hard for, and I'd thought about having love with Eric if that would keep us from losing everything. That's all it would be, just some quick love. It wouldn't be any different from the love I'd had with half a dozen guys before I met you. I remembered all of them from time to time, but thinking of the great times I'd had with them never had any effect on my love for you, so I didn't think having love with Eric would affect us. Eric would just be love, you were love. And you would never know. You were dead to the world, and neither Eric nor I would ever tell. I told myself that if I did it I would be doing it for us, doing it to ensure our future. But even as I rationalized it in my head, I knew that I just couldn't do it, and I told Eric that I could never do a thing like that to you, and I walked away from him again. A couple of drinks later he came up to me and told me that the offer was still open. By then I'd convinced myself that we were going to end up on poverty row if you lost your job, and I hated the idea of us being destitute and homeless. Oh, I know I was being overly dramatic, but at the time I was bombed half out of my mind and not thinking clearly. I told him that he had to promise me that you would never find out, and he promised. He promised and then took me by the hand and led me to his bedroom. He told me to get undressed and ready for him while he got rid of the other guests. Tony. Eric came into the room and saw me lying naked on the bed. I had to do this for Rob, but I didn't have to like it. I kept my eyes closed as Eric took off his clothes and then climbed onto the bed. He lowered his head and he started eating my peach, and even though having my peach eaten by Rob is something that I loved, I kept myself still. I was going to let Eric have his way with me, but I was determined that I was not going to enjoy it. He pushed, and the head of his arm entered me. He worked it slowly, giving me time to adjust, and inch by inch he worked more. I had never felt so full in my life. He kept working slowly into me until he was buried as deep as he could go. I couldn't believe that I had taken all of him. I let my body relax, and Eric started loving me with long, slow strokes. He was touching me in places that had never been touched before. I pushed up at him, and he felt my response, and he began to love me a little harder. He grabbed my legs and put them up on his shoulders, and then he began to push hard and deep. I promised him I would be his forever if he would just make happy. Eric started pounding hard into me, and I knew what was happening. He was ready, and I wanted it. Yes, baby, yes. Do it, do it, do it. He rammed me hard, and I felt him shoot, and I cried out. Yes, yes, oh God, yes. And I had the largest orgasm of my life. Eric collapsed on top of me, and I wrapped my arms around him and kissed him. He rolled off of me, but I didn't want it to end. I slid down and lifted his limp arm in my hand. Even soft, it was still the biggest that I had ever seen. I took the head in my mouth and went to work on getting him hard again. He loved me 3 more times that night. Twice before helping me get Rob home, and 1 more time on my bed with a passed-out Rob lying next to us not 1 foot away. He called me 2 days later, and I met him at the Hilton, and he loved me senseless. Since then I have loved him 2 or 3 times a week, and once when Rob was on a 5-day fishing trip I spent 3 days with Eric and never got dressed. I don't love Eric. Rob. That was 3 years ago, Tony. I never knew, and I probably would have never known if you hadn't told me. Why, for God's sake, didn't you just keep quiet about it? Because there is more to it. After that first time it never stopped. I've been seeing Eric 2 or 3 times a week ever since. You have had an ongoing affair with my boss for over 3 years? Yes. And yet you can stand there and tell me that you love me and that I mean the world to you. Forgive me, Tony, But that just does not compute. Eric wasn't about love, Rob. Eric was about size. You know, I used to use a large thing when you went out of town, but even that large thing never touched me in places. I don't love Eric, and in fact, there are times I can't even stand him, but I love the feeling I get when that huge piece of meat goes into me. It is strictly a physical thing, and as trite as it may sound, it is only love. So why now? Why the confession when I have so obviously have not had a clue? Eric has been pushing me to leave you and marry him. It seems that I'm the only woman who has ever been able to fully accommodate him, and he wants to make me a permanent part of his life. I have been saying no for almost a year now. Why? He obviously has what you want and say you need. I don't love him, I love you. I love bouncing around on his huge pole, but that is all. I convinced myself that I could have the best of both worlds. I still don't understand. You were right. I didn't know when things were going fine for you, so why tell me now? I wanted you to hear it from me, not him. I owed you that much. Why was I going to hear it from him? He got tired of hearing me say no to his proposal, and he decided that the way to go is to let you know what has been going on so you will leave me. He figures he can step in after the divorce, and since you would be out of the picture, I'd have no reason to say no anymore. So is that what you are going to do? Marry him when the dust settles? No. I don't plan on ever seeing him again. Why? You'll be free and he has what you crave. I'll never forgive him for splitting us up. I know that sounds irrational. What I've been doing is what is going to end the marriage, but you would never have known if not for him deciding to tell you. That, at least in my mind, makes him responsible for killing our marriage. I got up and started to leave the room, and Tony said, "Where are you going?" "To leave you alone so you can finish packing." I saw the sad look come over her face and said, "What? You thought I'd just accept what you had to say and then say, 'That's okay, Tony, I still love you and we will get through this'? A girl can always hope." "Sorry, Tony, I'm just not built that way." Plus 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 plus. Tony. It broke my heart to see him like that, and know that I was the one responsible. He shuffled into the visiting room with handcuffs on his wrists and shackles on his ankles. He stopped so the deputy could take the cuffs off, and then he shuffled over and sat down across from me. I tried to lighten the moment. "Orange is not your color. The selection here is limited. To what do I owe the pleasure of this visit? You are still my husband, Rob, at least until you get out and can see a divorce attorney. But even a divorce won't change anything. I know I screwed up big time on forsaking all others. But the until death us do part is always going to be there. I love you to death, baby, and a divorce is not going to change that. I'm here so that we can get our stories straight. I could have waited until you made bail, but I don't know who you might talk to between now and then and what you might say." "What do you mean? Get our stories straight?" "I talked to a lawyer, and he said it would be better for you if the story was that Eric was blackmailing me, and you found out, as opposed to you just going after him in a jealous rage." "It wasn't a jealous rage. It was just a rather violent resignation. The story I got was that you walked into his office, he stood up, said good morning, and you hit him so hard he flew back, hit his head on the wall, and then fell to the floor. Then you said, 'Consider this my resignation, you loving asshole.' And then you kicked him in the balls a half-dozen times. Is that right?" "No. I kicked him in the balls 11 times. They say you unbuttoned his fly, picked him up, and carried him over to his desk." "What have you told the police?" "Nothing. I'm smart enough not to say a word until I have an attorney present." "Have you got one yet?" "No, I called Dad and he's trying to find me one. I'll call him and tell him to stop looking. I've got you one, but he's in court right now. He'll be here as soon as he finishes up there. My story is that Eric got me drunk and raped me. He told me that he had videotaped it, and if I didn't keep loving him he would see to it that everyone I know saw the tape. Later he told me that you really didn't get drunk. He drugged you to get you out of the way. I gave in because I was afraid to let you see the tape. Last week he told me that I was going to have to start servicing some of his customers and I refused. When he threatened me with the tape, I told him to go to hell and then I confessed everything to you. The question you will be asked is, why would you be afraid of a tape of a rape? It would show you being forced. Because the tape would be edited. Halfway into the rape my body got into it, and that is the only part of the tape he would show. It will be my word against his. You do know that if he has some way to prove otherwise you could end up in here for perjury? It is a chance I have to take. You are in here because of me, so I need to do everything I can to get you out. You mentioned bail. I don't have enough to swing it if it is set too high. The lawyer I got you said he thought he could get you released on your own recognizance. And if not? A bail bondsman is going to want 10% plus security, and you don't get the 10% back. The only thing I have that I can put up for security is the house, and you would have to sign off on that. We won't use a bondsman. I'll put up the entire amount, so I'll get it all back. How in the hell can you do that? I sold the cabin that my folks left me. It was going to be my get-out-of-town money to set me up when I moved back home. As long as your bail isn't over $137,000, I can swing it. Why are you moving back there? I can't stay here. I couldn't stay this close to you knowing how you feel about me. I need to put distance between us to keep me from driving myself crazy. Just then the deputy came over and told us our time was up. I got up and hurried from the room so I wouldn't have to see them handcuff Rob. Plus. Rob. It was a little anticlimactic. The lawyer showed up about half an hour after Tony left. He advised me to tell the police only that Tony confessed to being blackmailed and that I realized I had no legal recourse against Eric, so I settled for some personal satisfaction. I gave the cops a statement to that effect, and the next morning I was arraigned and bail was set at $25,000, and Tony, I put up the money. She told her story to the police, and of course Eric said she was lying. It was going to be a he said/she said thing, and then I got lucky. 2 girls who used to work with me came forward and said that Eric had come onto them, and when they wouldn't come across, he fired them. Nothing big, but it did go to Eric's character, and it would look good to a jury. Then my lawyer let it be known that his best friend was a reporter on one of the local newspapers and that his friend was considering doing a story on beautiful harassment in the workplace. He thought that it was great that now he had a local company that he could use in his story, and he had asked if Tony might like to be interviewed for the story. Eric's lawyer, my lawyer, and Tony huddled. Tony said no to the interview, and suddenly the charges were dropped. The only casualties in the affair were my job and Eric's arm. I admit that things would not have worked out well for me at all without Tony's help, and I was grateful to her for sticking by me. But it didn't change anything between us. There was absolutely no chance of repairing the damage caused by her 3-year affair. I could probably have handled it had she confessed after the night of the party, but 3 years? No way. That, and knowing that it would still be going on if Eric hadn't gotten stupid. I could never trust Tony again after finding out what she had been doing. Even if she had walked away from Eric, could I trust if she ever found herself in a situation where some guy let her know he had a big deal that she wouldn't go for it? However, what she did do for me did make a relationship possible. She didn't move back to her hometown. She bought a 2-bedroom condo on the other side of town, and we date from time to time, mostly when she needs to get laid and calls me. She says there will never be another man in her life, and she will wait for me to get over my hurt and realize that we are meant to be together. It is never going to happen. I do love her, and I would love to be with her. But I could not and will not spend the rest of my life wondering if she was being true to me or not. Regardless of what she said and did to prove that she was mine alone, the doubt would always be there, and I just could not live like that.